like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council's Public Works, Public Safety Committee to order. Joining me on the committee today is Michael Lilliquist. Jack Weiss is a member of it but has not arrived yet. We have two items on our agenda today, but we will have a quorum, so there's Mr. Weiss. So we will move forward with our first item.
Okay. Good morning. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The first item is a resolution. This is a requirement of a grant application that the city is pursuing for capital funding for renovation of the federal building. It's a grant opportunity through the Washington State Historical Society. Call for projects. We identified it as an opportunity for the federal building. As you know, there is money in the 2014 budget for renovations of the federal building, and this certainly seemed like a good opportunity to leverage that money. We are working on an application. The maximum request is $1 million. As the council may recall, the ultimate renovation cost for the federal building is quite high. We certainly aren't intending on doing that in phase one, but we know that there's lots of work to do at the federal building. Could certainly use the $1 million for phase one, or certainly phase two, which is looking at kind of the backbone of the building, the structural, mechanical, electrical, some of the things that just need to be done on a 100-year-old building. The money that is in the 2014 budget would be eligible for match to the grant. Even if we spend it prior to getting the grant award, we can go back money that was spent on the federal building and consider that as part of the 67% match requirement. So staff is requesting council move forward with the resolution. We have not finalized the application yet, but are working closely with not just public works staff, but planning staff that specialize in historical buildings and making sure that we put forward a nice application. So with that, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Committee? Michael?
The federal building is tricky for us to rehabilitate because it is a historical building, and we need to, required actually, to respect the historical integrity of the building. That extra expense, I think, is really nice to offset that extra by move approval or move that we recommend passing the resolution this evening.
Okay. All those in favor of the recommendation, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will recommend to the full council this evening that, to move forward on this. Yeah, I think it's a great idea if we can get it.
Yeah, keep our fingers crossed. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we'll continue to look for other opportunities, obviously, at the federal building.
Okay. And next item, I guess, is a work session on the Alabama corridor safety improvements.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the follow-up to the public hearing that was held at the previous council meeting. We had good turnout, lots of comments from various neighborhoods about the project, and this work session is going to give us an opportunity to go through those comments. Councilmember Weiss submitted a memo as well. So what I thought we would do today, or at least propose to you, is that we respond to what we heard in the public hearing, and then if the council would like, we could go through Councilmember Weiss's memo, and then obviously answer any other questions that you may have. We have staff here as well as our consultants, so hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that do come up. So I went through the comments that we heard at the public hearing, and I tried to kind of categorize them and find what was similar about them so that we can group them together and provide a response. So if that's okay, Terry, I'd like to just start going through that.
That sounds good.
Okay. So I think one of the primary things we heard when folks looked at the recommendations as a whole, specifically people in the central part of the Alabama corridor, saw that there was a road diet proposed for the west edge and the east edge, and had questions why that wouldn't work through the central part of Alabama. Why couldn't we do a 4-to-3 road diet, reduce the travel lanes and add bike lanes and a center turn lane through there? So we talked a little bit about that at the public hearing, and certainly the feasibility report goes into some pretty specific detail about that. And what it really comes down to is the characteristics of that section of the corridor are quite different in terms of volumes. So when we go through an analysis and look at what would happen if you reduced a travel lane, we run the model. So there's a transportation model that looks at all the volume, looks at the turn movements, looks at capacity, and analyzes what the impacts at the various intersections would be. And if you run that 4-to-3 road diet through the whole corridor, including the central part, the intersections just can't handle it, and the queuing at the intersection becomes quite long. So the backups are much, much longer, and to a level that we certainly feel is not acceptable. And there's a couple reasons why that is. It's not just the inconvenience of sitting at congestion, but as we talked quite a bit about at the public hearing, you do have it as a high transit route, so we don't want a lot of congestion. We want transit to be able to go through and flow on this secondary arterial. When you have excessive congestion and queuing at intersections, it causes a couple different things that aren't ideal, especially when you're trying to build a safer corridor, and that's what this really is. It's a safety project. The congestion causes people to make some questionable decisions, become a little bit more risky in their movements. They get frustrated, and that's where you see people making decisions where they might do cut through traffic, going on streets that really aren't intended for the volume. They're not arterials. So the congestion has some real downfalls. It's not just, why don't we just reduce it and people can find another way to go. Alabama is a secondary arterial. That came up during the presentation, and I think that's important, or it came up during the public hearing. A secondary arterial, the reason for that classification, it really doesn't have anything to do with the design of the street or the volume of the street. What a secondary arterial means, at least in the way we classify arterials, and it's fairly common, is secondary arterials mean that it's an arterial that takes you through the city, from one part of the city to the other part of the city. Primary arterials take you in and out of the city. They take you through the city, but they also lead out of the city into the county, into other parts of the county. Alabama does just what a secondary arterial would do. It takes you from one neighborhood to another neighborhood through the city, and it's really serving that purpose. It's the highest volume secondary arterial we have, so it's getting a lot of traffic, and suggesting that, if you did a road diet and it created congestion, people would just find another arterial to go on is problematic. I mean, each one of the arterials are serving a purpose. We have very few crossings of I-5. Iowa, Barkley, they're already taking crossings of I-5, and Alabama is doing the same. So it really is working as intended. So that's kind of, if there's any questions about the road diet, we have the transportation engineers here that can talk in more detail about what they found when they modeled it. But what it really comes down to is the characteristics of the corridor. The volumes are much less on the west and east section. When we look at the central section, even at today's volumes, it doesn't work well. And we also have to consider growth. And while we won't have a lot of growth in the watershed, hopefully, we will experience growth in Barkley. In fact, it's zoned for growth, and we anticipate growth, and that's an area where we want to see residential infill. So we need to be aware of that. The other thing we heard quite a bit, and I think it's a good point, is the C-curbing. And so since we couldn't do the road diet, the other thing we looked at was doing turn movement restrictions. And that's a very common way to look at how to make a corridor safer. You eliminate some of those conflicting movements. So C-curbing through that central area, and what we heard at the public hearing from folks is that that really does separate the neighborhood. It separates the neighborhood with the C-curbing. It gives a feel of a freeway, which is something that came up quite a few times, and a concern that may increase speeds. So I wanted to talk about those a little bit. I think those are really good points, and they're good concerns, and staff shares those same concerns. And when we looked at the proposal along the corridor, we were really trying to do just the opposite in terms of separating the neighborhood. One of the things that we've heard for a long time about Alabama corridor throughout the city is that it's a barrier, that it does separate neighborhoods. It's a barrier for bike and ped. It's really a barrier for all users. And so while the C-curbing may feel like that through a section there, by putting all the additional crossings in, and so we're putting in additional Hawk systems, which are a little bit different. We've never used those in the city, so those are pedestrian crossings that actually act as a a signal to some degree, so they're activated by the PED and they provide a red rather than just a flashing yellow. They actually provide a red stop through traffic. So those are something that we're pretty excited about. Two of those in this central corridor, along with the already enhanced crossings and the fully signalized intersection at St. Paul, those are really intended to connect the neighborhood, both for bike and ped. And it also provides safer vehicle traffic through there too. So while we understand the concern about the barriers separating the neighborhood, we really did try through this recommendation to bring the neighborhood together, and I think it does that in terms of pedestrian connectivity, bike connectivity when we move forward with the bicycle master plan and the boulevards that are identified in there. They all line up with these signals and these Hawk systems. I think that's really the same answer when you talk about it gives it the feel of a freeway. I think the concern is there that you're not going to have those turn movements, you're not going to have people stopped in the traveled way, which the feeling is that when vehicles realize that, they're just going to go through there. It's going to create a safer feeling for folks to just travel through there like a freeway and may increase speeds. One of the things I think we have to remember is working with WTA, one of the really big things that came out of this was WTA and the city working together to identify where the bus stops should be. We talked a lot about this being the highest, most productive go line for WTA, and there's a lot of ridership, and it really does support the land use along the corridor very well. One of the challenges with the existing system, where we have, like we put in a new enhanced crossing at St. Paul, that doesn't necessarily work really well with existing bus stops. And so because there are times of day where there's enough gaps in the traffic flow on Alabama, people do just run across Alabama, and they might get to transit, get off transit. By relocating the bus stops to these new crossings, to these Hawks and to the enhanced crossings in St. Paul, people are going to be getting off the bus right at these crossings. And so our hope is, and certainly this is the way it was designed, is that those pedestrian crossings will be much more heavily utilized than the existing enhanced crossing now, because the location is going to be lined up with transit. So if that proves to be true, that feel of a freeway or free-flowing traffic, that will be mitigated by more use of the crossings. I mean, that's the way this is designed, and I think that's the way that it will work. The speed question, we looked at that quite a bit, and that's something that we looked at prior to the public hearing. It's certainly something that we knew would be an issue, that if you put in a center median C-curve, would the speed be impacted? You know, would it increase? There's really no data that we can find that would suggest that does happen. I think our response to that is probably the same as the question about the overall speed limit, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Because there's no data that we can find that would suggest speed would just automatically increase because of the C-curbing, we would suggest that we look at the speed limit after the improvements are done and act accordingly at that point. And might as well just go right into the speed limit discussion, which was another thing that came up at the public hearing and that we looked at in the feasibility study. With whatever improvements are put in, should the city consider just reducing the posted speed limit from 35 to 25 or even 30? And we talked about that we looked at that. We do have concerns. Public Works staff does have concerns about just reducing the speed limit without an engineering report to show that that makes sense. And speed limits are a tricky thing. It really is a function of the character of the roadway. To just go in and if we didn't change anything, post it to 25, could be problematic in terms of people drive the speed that they feel comfortable driving. Right now, people feel comfortable driving 35, and the 85th percentile, which is the measure we use when we look at speed limits. And what it means is that 85% of the people are traveling at a certain speed or lower. It's right about 38 right now, which is right where you would think it would be on a 35-mile-an-hour posted street. So people really are driving the speed limit. Average speed is below 35. It's something that we think is important to look at, but we believe it should be looked at after the project is complete. And the character of the road will change. There'll be crossings. Some sections will be down to 3-lane, and it may very well make sense to post it at 30 30 at that time, but we really would request that we delay that decision. WTA spoke about it a little bit at the hearing. They're not in favor of reducing the speed. Police and fire are not in favor of reducing the speed at this time. But if it makes sense after the project's done, then we should certainly consider it. Ultimately, council makes a decision on the speed limit. All we would suggest is that we're able to do a proper engineering report, present it to council with our recommendations on the speed limit. And again, we would suggest we do that after whatever improvements you recommend are completed. We did hear a little bit about what would the impact, again, this is mostly impact being first responders with the C curbing there. And one of the things that we felt was really important as we started this project was that police were part of the discussion. And so as we went through the scoping of the project, we went through the various recommendations that came out of the feasibility study. Police and fire were with us throughout those discussions. And it's really important, obviously, that they're not impacted and that they're able to get to where they need to be without being impeded by whatever we do. The C curbings that are being recommended are mountable. Police and fire can go over them. So there is a way to go where needed. Police is usually not the issue because police they don't respond from a central location the way fire responders typically do. Police are out on patrol, they're coming from wherever. So the real matter for them is, do they know what improvements are in? Can they get around so it's not entirely congested? That's the worst situation for them. And if they have to go over the curb, they can. They can also go into oncoming traffic if they needed. We talked a lot about this with the police chiefs, with the lieutenants, with the responders, and they felt comfortable that their response times would not be impacted by this. If they were, then we would not be recommending this as our recommended improvements. One of the other things we heard from several people that commented at the public hearing was the impact on the parallel side streets by putting in a C curb. If you put a C curb in Alabama and you restrict left turn movements, then people need to find another way to get to where they're going if they live on one of those streets that they can't make a left off Alabama. And so primarily the concern would be Texas, St. Paul. So we looked at the volumes on Texas, and if you're familiar with that section of Texas that runs from Pacific through to the base of the hill there at U, we put traffic calming in several years ago. We looked at the traffic counts that were done in 2009, and then we looked at the traffic counts again in 2013. We actually saw a reduction in volume on both St. Paul and Texas over the last 4-year period, and both St. Paul and Texas have traffic calming on them. So St. Paul has some speed tables, and Texas has the little mini circles at the intersections. The volumes are very, very reasonable at the current level. In fact, the volumes went down, as I mentioned, in the last 4-year period. So when we look at the condition of the street, the current volumes and the current speeds, and the fact that Texas has sidewalk on the north side, St. Paul has facilities throughout some of the area, we think that the impacts that those side streets may see based on the turn restrictions won't be too burdensome for those streets to handle. We looked at it. It's obviously a concern. I think it's legitimate for people to have those concerns, and it's something that we certainly should be aware of and should have looked at. We did look at that. When you look at the number of people that live on the dead end cul-de-sacs that run north off Alabama in that area, the total number of homes, you look at the total number of trips that we may expect to see maybe during a PM peak or an AM peak, something like that, compared to the volume that are already on those streets, the streets do have the ability to handle it. And the fact that we have pedestrian facilities on Texas makes us feel comfortable about it. So that is the response to the side streets. We just really don't think that it's a major issue. But something that we should definitely be aware of. So I think this is probably the last one, the one that maybe we can spend a little bit more time on and can answer questions, certainly answer questions on any of these whenever you want. the convenience issue. And that's something that when we looked at this and looked at the fact that we'd be restricting left turn movements to streets that don't have other access points, meaning they're dead ends. You have 4 streets off Alabama going north, Queen, Racine, Undine, and Toledo specifically, that they don't go through to Illinois. East-north is not built there, so they don't have another access except for off of Alabama. I think what we looked at is there's a couple ways to mitigate that. And they're not proposed in the initial recommendations, but I think we should talk a little bit about those. And of the 2 ways, one is probably more consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and our overall transportation policies than the other. So the 2 we looked at is we looked at widening Alabama through that section. So could you widen Alabama through the area where the C curb is proposed and make it a 5-lane section? So you would have a two-way left turn lane so that people could still make that left turn movement, but they were out of the traveled way. So instead of stopping in the traveled lane to make your left, you could have a 2-way left turn lane. That would mitigate some of the accidents that we see in terms of rear ends and side swipes. We have the width to do that probably, and we looked at the right-of-way, so we probably have the right-of-way in Alabama. And we've widened Alabama at the intersections throughout the corridor to do that very thing, put in 5-lane sections at like Pacific and Orleans, so you already see a 5-lane section there. It would certainly have an impact on the property owners that abut Alabama, and we've been through this before when we've widened Alabama. I mean, you encroach, even though it's right-of-way, you come closer to the homes. You have issues with impacting the people that abut right on Alabama. We haven't done detailed engineering to know exactly what those impacts would be, but it's fair to assume that there would be some impacts. The challenges that we see with widening Alabama through there is while you would create the left turn pocket, which would certainly be a safer situation than you have now, it's a less safe situation than putting a C-curbing in for a couple different reasons. One, you would still allow the left turn movement. So even though you're in a protected turning lane, you're still making a movement, so that's going to have some exposure to other types of accidents at those locations. But it's also making a less desirable situation for pedestrians because you're increasing the width that they have to cross, so it's a little bit less desirable in terms of you're now crossing a 5th lane. It doesn't really do anything for transit or for pedestrians. And so when we look at widening an arterial from to a 5-lane section, we kind of look at our comprehensive plan and transportation goals as guidance. We didn't feel that was a viable solution because widening an arterial without providing for improvements for other modes like PED, transit, and bicycles didn't seem to be in line with what we tried to do as a city. It's also very expensive. So it's an additional $1 million is our rough estimate. So the project engineer went out and did a very high level estimate. What would it cost? So it would add about $1 million to the project to do that. So that's one way to mitigate the impacts of not have the impacts of a center curb there. The other way we looked at, and I would say both these options would need certainly much more discussion, but the other one we looked at was to build east-north. And east-north is a street that's about a block north of Alabama. It's a block north of Alabama. It's through this section where we're proposing the C curb. It's unimproved. So the right-of-way exists, but there's no improvements throughout that right-of-way. If you built that, and again, I do want to stress, this is not something that we've had detailed discussions with the neighborhood about. It's not in the comprehensive plan. It's not in the neighborhood plan. The neighborhood plan does identify, the Roosevelt neighborhood plan does identify building east-north as a bike connection at some point, but it doesn't stress it as a full transportation connection. But if you were to go through and do that, staff looked at it and we thought we could build it at a very minimal standard, almost like an alley. So you wouldn't have curb, gutter, sidewalk. It would simply be an access. And if you look at St. Paul, which lies right in the center of that area of the central corridor that's being proposed to have a C curb installed. Off of St. Paul, you could build it about 600 feet to the west, and that would serve Racine and Queen. And if you build it 600 feet or so to the east, that would serve Toledo and Undine. Those are the 4.
Can we put a map up? Do you have one?
Yeah, so Chris will look at putting a map up. If you built that, then anyone would have access off St. Paul, which under the proposed recommendations would be a fully signalized intersection. So in terms of the inconvenience to those folks, it would largely be mitigated. You could certainly have your right in, right out off of Alabama. But if you needed to make that left turn movement, depending on where you're coming from, you could always go to St. Paul. And St. Paul would be fully signalized intersection. And that would allow you to go up to this newly constructed east-north. Again, we would build it to a very minimal standard, and I think one of the concerns we would hear from the neighborhood is a concern about cut-through traffic on east-north. If you build it the way we would suggest, it really wouldn't be, there would be nowhere to cut through to, because it wouldn't connect all the way over to Woburn, and it wouldn't connect all the way over to Pacific. It would simply provide access to those 4 dead-end streets. So one concern could be, I think, answered, which is the cut-through traffic. I think the other concern the neighbors would have is certainly the folks that are adjacent to the unopened right-of-way have become accustomed to not having that built. I mean, so if you built a street through there, even though it's right-of-way, certainly the folks that live adjacent to that right-of-way have, it's been unimproved all these years, and so that would be a new situation for them and potentially less desirable than what they have now. So I think it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off between the isolation of a dead end and the connectivity of building east-north through. When you look at our comprehensive plan and the transportation goals and policies, it's hard to argue against the connectivity aspect of it. I mean, that's really what we preach, right? We always talk about providing additional connectivity for all modes. If you built it at a very minimal standard, I think you would have very, very low volume, very, very low speeds, but would allow that access to the folks on Queen, Racine, Toledo, and Undine, and would largely mitigate the concerns about inconvenience.
Ted, map up there. Those green lines are proposed bicycle paths. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, bicycle boulevards. That's correct.
And East North Street, is that the dashed line 1 block north of Alabama?
That is.
And there's an incomplete segment somewhere on there. Which streets is it between?
Yeah, so right now it's really only built. Chris will answer.
It's actually built over to Queen Street from Moore Street right here where the cursor is. Going to the east, you get to Pacific, and then it goes about 1 block and then a really minimal standard over to Queen here. So the unbuilt portion is about from here over to about here. But this is all public right-of-way right here.
And the issue is, if you look at that, that's a good map. Keep that up, Chris. Right now, when we look at the C curbing and the restrictions, if Valencia and Verona, they will still be able to take lefts off of Woburn. They'll be able to take lefts out of what will be an extended left turn lane slash, left turn pocket slash turn lane that will go all the way back close to Undine. Undine will be restricted, but Verona and Valencia can still make the left turn movement. So in terms of constructing east-north, if you really were doing it to provide accessibility to the folks that are most impacted by the C-curb, you wouldn't need to extend it over to Verona, only to Undine. So it's about 1,200 feet from Queen to Undine. We looked at it, we costed it out, assuming a very, very minimal standard, like I said, almost like an alley, and it's about $400,000, $500,000, and that's assuming storm drainage and all the things that we would need to do. So it's it's about half the cost of doing the Alabama. I think we feel better about that number than the Alabama number, which would take a little bit more engineering. So it's an option, but again, it's not an option that we've had detailed discussions with the homeowners about. It's really coming up because of the turn restrictions are creating an inconvenience, and that's a very real concern. I mean, we understand that not being able to make that left directly into your street is an inconvenience, although it's something that happens on arterials at some time when it becomes just urban enough and the volumes become high enough and the accident rates become high enough. It's a very real management strategy and effective proven technique to limit accidents. And again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this project is a safety project. That's what it's about. When we look at the accident rates on Alabama, it's something that we really should be addressing. And so given the conditions, the C-curbing through this section was, in our opinion, the most viable option. Toledo's a way to mitigate that. Widening Alabama is a way to mitigate that. Neither one of them are in the recommendations that we've brought forward to council, but certainly with council's direction, we could pursue those projects to mitigate any impacts of the sea curbing. I went through quite a bit of information there, but if we look at the public comments that we received at the public hearing, that really was the bulk of them grouped in. You know, we had more speakers, but they all hit on those similar topics. So if I can answer any questions about any of those, be happy to do so.
Michael?
You said that you recommend, rather than adjusting the speed limit now, making the hearing change first, coming back, and re-looking at traffic speeds. But I didn't actually hear a good convincing argument why. Why not change now? I know it's your recommendation, but I didn't hear a strong argument why.
Right. Well, the reason why is anytime we make any kind of an improvement in a corridor, there's a couple reasons. So the first one is whenever we make any improvements, any traffic revisions, whether it's a new signal, a new control at an intersection, whatever it may be, we recognize that there's a period of time for people to become adjusted to it, and we see what the traffic flow is. We think that's important. Speed limit is the reason for speed limits, and it really is a safety issue, is you do want to have the speed posted very close to where people feel comfortable driving. And not just not just a few people, but where the majority of the people feel comfortable driving, so that your flow is very close for everyone. So you have a posted speed, you have a speed people drive, and then you have a kind of a variance of what is the range that most people drive at, and you want that to be very consistent. You don't want some people going fast, some people going slow. If everything about the corridor suggests 35, right, then most people will drive 35. Even if it's posted 25. And so what would happen at one scenario is if you posted it at 25, but it felt 35, WTA, certain people will drive 25 because it's posted 25, right? But you're going to get more of an inconsistency in terms of the range that people drive, because for a normal driver, it's going to feel like 35 is okay. It creates a bit of a conflict. So we really do want the speed limit to correspond with how people want to drive. And it's very tempting for people to say, we just want to make it 25. We just want to slow people down through there. It's problematic in that regard in terms of the safety. It's problematic from an enforcement perspective, and so we work closely with police, and police is not in favor of reducing the speed limit without going through this process. And we followed up with them after the public hearing, too, because we recognize that it's a concern. If everyone wants to drive a little bit faster than the posted speed limit, it becomes an enforcement issue as well, right? Doesn't mean we can't do it. It's just not our recommendation. What our recommendation is to see how the corridor feels after the improvements and go back and do that study. And what this study does is it looks at those very things. When we say we'd like to do an engineering study after the improvements are done, that's what the engineering study would evaluate. It would go out and would do speed and volume counts. It would do range of speeds. It would do all the things that the traffic engineers want to look at to see what should this be posted. And I don't know if Eric's here or any of the traffic engineers at this point could come up and hit on anything that I didn't hit on. But that's the general reasoning for it. And again, you know, not that this is all about trying to keep WTA on time, but it is something to keep in mind. And you heard Rick at the public hearing that 25 is very problematic for them. 30, and we looked at 30 in the feasibility study. So the feasibility study looked at these things, and 30 was something that WTA could live with. They don't recommend it, and they don't want it, but they could live with it in terms of being on time in their current schedules. And there's things they could do that I don't have the detailed understanding of, but Rick could speak to. So that's why we want to wait. I don't know if that is satisfactory. We talked quite a bit about it, and we don't see the issue with waiting to see how it plays out, but we do see issues with just going in and posting it before we know how traffic's respond to the improvements.
I guess you start with a very good point, which is if you build a road which feels like 35 miles an hour and safe and post 25, you've just created a problem. And right now the natural intrinsic speed is around 35, and that's the speed, and that's all, or mostly good, few people's speed. But we're putting in more intersections and the Hawk crossings And perhaps we could do other things too, so that the natural intrinsic speed might be closer to 30 miles an hour. Matter of fact, I would assume that the natural intrinsic speed will be less than it is now because of the crossings that are put in, the fact there will be fewer long stretches between lights. So I'm not arguing for 25, but I'm wondering if you've thought about the fact that the natural intrinsic speed might be lowered by the recommended changes, and there might be one or two other additional changes that will lower that intrinsic speed closer to what could be a posted speed.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and we did think about that, and I think the engineers may disagree with me, but my thought is that we probably will see a bit of a reduction in speed given the improvements that we're seeing in the additional crossings, and I think that's certainly going to be the case in the areas where we see a reduction in travel lanes as well. You want to add it? See if Eric wants to come up and add a little bit to this, and he serves as the city's traffic engineer and would be the one that would lead a study that would look at the speed limit. So you want to hit on anything that I may not have touched on adequately?
No, I think it's a very good discussion. Eric Johnston, City Public Works Department. The natural speed is the one we're after, and we also need to keep in mind that the speed limit is the maximum posted speed. And so if we can get the speed limit to stay at 35, but the natural drop has various improvements that go in, a change of the west of I-5, a change in the configuration east of I-5, some C-curbing, some additional signals, has the very strong potential to potentially lower that natural speed at certain times of the day. But to have that 85th percentile speed be 30, 33, 34 miles per hour, a posted speed at 35 as a maximum was not a necessary thing. Would extend the speeds on this street as over time, as you put more signals in, more hawks in, more congestion, more cars in there, that natural speed will also come down to some extent. Our recommendation truly is that we would continue to look at that. We're not saying no that the speed limit should come down. We're not saying that it needs to stay at 35. It certainly does need some more thought and put that over the next couple of months, both before the improvements and after the improvements as well.
I understand that part, and that that makes sense to wait with it. One thing I'm wondering about waiting on, what happens if we do all the safety issues but not put in the C-curbing? And wait to see how the road flows and everything, just like we would with traffic, speed, because there's going to be a natural slowing down with all of this, we think. So what happens if we decide to wait on C-curbing to see how the flow goes, to see how the safety goes? Because I can't help but think, reading through this, everybody benefits. WTA benefits, the commuters going through benefits, everyone benefits except those who live in the central part of the Roosevelt neighborhood, where other neighborhoods we've put in things to keep people from passing through and driving through the neighborhoods, and here we're doing something to encourage that. So what would happen if we decide to wait on the C-curbing and put the other items in?
Right. So I guess there's a couple of answers to that. One is just the logistics of our grant with WashDOT and FHWA, which this was a grant for safety improvements, and it was really broken into two parts. And one was the feasibility analysis, which is what we're presenting to the council, which council does have to formally adopt the recommendations. That's part of the process. And then the second part is WashDOT needs to approve the recommendations as well. So by not completing everything, that's something that we would have to see how WashDOT would respond to that, because certainly the accidents exist in that corridor and in that section of Alabama. And so by not completing the C-curbing component of it, and we're also not putting in left turn lanes or anything to facilitate any of those movements, we aren't fully completing the safety. We just need to be aware of that.
Ted,
and I'll turn over to Eric. The one thing I do want to say, because we've heard that quite a bit, that we're not doing anything for this central corridor, and I guess I would say that I think we are, and that we're putting in a fully signalized at St. Paul, and we're putting in the crossings, and so the pedestrian crossings. So we are providing some fairly significant pedestrian improvements in that center corridor. I would agree that we're not limiting the travel lanes like we are in the other areas, but the project has this very narrow goal of safety, and that's really the way we're approaching it. And I think that it's something we can look at. It's a good question, and see what Eric has to add to that. But I think it would require some additional discussion.
I was just going to echo what Ted just said about this improvement is truly related to safety. And we look at safety improvements, we're trying to conflict points. And the C-curbing has been a very proven method of eliminating those conflict points. And having some experience on C-curbing projects that are in very commercial corridors, one of the concerns from the business owners was you're making it more difficult for my customers, but at the same token, it's becoming safer for your customers to get to the store. So likewise on this corridor, while it's not necessarily as convenient, it would be safer for the people living along the corridor to avoid those left-turning movements and those rear-end collisions that are occurring. It's not as convenient, admittedly, but there certainly is a balance for all those users. But clearly, the C-curbing in particular is intended to be safety improvement and has been proven effective at many other locations.
The big problem between residential neighborhoods and commercial areas are, yes, it might be a little more inconvenience on Meridian to go up and around to come back to the store. It doesn't route that additional traffic through neighborhoods who don't have sidewalks and that are quiet neighborhoods, and thus increasing this, the danger for the people in that neighborhood, because you're routing more traffic and you've got kids playing out along the streets in those neighborhoods. So yes, it's safer maybe on the one end, but it's not safer necessarily in the neighborhood. And there's a big difference I see between commercial and, the residential. And so, I understand, that's a quick comparison, but I don't think it's a good comparison. Well,
Just to finish up on that point, the point of maybe we wait on the C-curbing. I think the other thing that we need to, staff's talked a lot about this, is the real issue here, when you look at the types of collisions that we see throughout the corridor, and I think that is important to think about. Speed plays a part in every collision, right? Because if people are going a little bit slower, the reaction times are a little bit better to respond to whatever might be the issue at hand. But generally speaking, speed is not a huge contributor, at least in our mind and the police's mind, of the accidents. It really is the movements and the sight, the visibility, and whenever you're taking a left turn across multiple lanes of traffic, it's the sight, it's the inability to see the vehicle in one of the oncoming lanes because it's obscured by traffic. And it's those side swipes where you're trying to get out and around. So it's always a factor. We would never say that speed's not a factor, but in terms of just reducing the speed limit through the corridor, whether we do it through a combination of a posted speed or it just happens through the improvements that are made in the corridor, the much bigger safety issue is the turning movements, obviously. I mean, everybody knows that. And so that would be a concern in not addressing the turning movements, at least in my part, in the first part of this project. So just wanted to reiterate that the speed, while a factor, not a primary factor, at least in our minds.
Jack?
So, Ted, I have a few questions, but I guess maybe to start off with is that the provisions of the grant from the state, so there's a study component of it and then there's an implementation. Is there a deadline associated with the use of the implementation part of the money? There
is. It's 2015. So we need to build these next summer.
September 30th.
At the end of?
It's September 30th, 2015. So we need to be under construction next summer.
Okay.
I mean, and if we're under construction next summer, whether we're entirely wrapped up by September 30th of 15, I think we could certainly work with WashDOT. But we need to be under construction next year.
The idea that you had associated with east-north, the couple blocks from St. Paul, either direction for the alley, would that be considered to be part of the grant, or would that be coming out of other funding sources?
I think we would need to find other funding sources for that, because the improvements as proposed in our recommendations are getting us pretty close to the grant, the total grant for the construction activities. We also want to overlay, and we think the overlay is a fairly significant safety component. If you've driven through there, the condition of the pavement, the the crack sealing and everything, just putting a nice overlay on there with new pavement markings would be a much safer project. So we think it's another $1 million or so to overlay, which our proposal would be take it out of the 15 overlay. I mean, Alabama is very close. It's high on the list for overlay. It's very justifiable to say we'll use the street overlay money in 15. To build the section of east-north, not to minimize the cost because $400,000 is significant, but I think the bigger process would be the public process working with the neighborhoods. If the neighborhoods were supportive, if Roosevelt was supportive of it, and we're able to go through the appropriate planning process, I think we can construct it. Whether we did it in 15 or 16, I think it's the planning part of it that's more challenging because it's a big change to those folks. So it's not part of the grant, but I think it's a project that is fun. And if something someone wanted to work with, it was, I think I could figure it out.
Is the overlay associated with the full 1 3/4 miles?
That's our hope. That's our hope. We'd really like to. I think it would really make up for a much better project. And so Freeman is the project engineer on this. He's looked at it. He's scoped it out. I think we can make do. I think we can pave the whole project with what we assume will be our budget, assuming it's close to historical levels.
Okay. Michael, then Pinky.
With regard to the C-curb, I'm wondering, right now I'm personally leaning to trying to remove from the proposal some of the C-curb, but maybe not all of it. Can you show us specifically where the C-curb would be? And then I'm going to ask you to say, if we removed 3/4 of the C-curb, what one might you think for turn restrictions?
Sure.
Where is it most needed?
Chris will show you where it's at, and
This is a little bit difficult to see just because of the scale, but what we're talking about is over here where I have the cursor. This is between James Street and I-5. There's already some existing C-curb. Some of that would be extended towards I-5. Then from I-5, starting at Moore Street, essentially, you'd have C-curb running all the way down to the new signal at St. Paul. Then from St. Paul to just past Undine, where we start to widen out the corridor. And then on the other side of Woburn, there would be a small section of C-curb between Woburn and just as you get to the turn signal at U Street, over here.
And if the council asked you to prioritize need where the conflict, the data shows that there's been the most conflict in the past, where would that be?
Well, the highest number of collisions at the signalized intersections, but between all of these, there's been quite a number of accidents at all of the side streets and in the alleyways. And there's not one section that's more important than another. It's the simple fact that there's turns being made across traffic and creating all these turning conflicts. So it's hard to say that there's one more important than another.
yeah, I think we could look at it and we can look at the accident analysis and the accident history, but I think I agree with Chris's last comment that to prioritize them, even based on historical accident data, would be, I think, challenging. I mean, the conditions are the same. I mean, the risks are the same largely, and maybe one area has been more fortunate to not have as many accidents as the other, but I would hesitate to rank them.
I want to add that the collision data that we've provided you is only for the most recent 6-year period. There's a whole additional historical collision history corridor, not just that, because that's what's done in our industry.
Pinky?
I totally appreciate that this is about safety, but sometimes I feel like we can get too narrow in our scope and just think about that. For example, when we widen the curve on U Street where it hits Alabama, we took away the turning lane. Now people backed up going through streets. Just on street alone, you can see how it can affect the way a traffic flow is. And I'm concerned that we're going to get all these hard if we're trying to reduce carbon footprint, them down, it's not going to help that situation. And I think we need to look at more than just the safety element. Even as important, I think we have to look a little bit more holistically how we're affecting all these neighborhoods and all these people's life patterns.
Yeah, no, there's certainly the potential for additional vehicle miles traveled. I think we recognize that. We also think that over time, well, you'll have the people that are unfamiliar with the area and may go a certain way, anticipating the ability to make a left. I think most folks that live on those streets would become accustomed to the best way to get there. Maybe the vehicle miles traveled wouldn't be as extreme as we may have thought. But I think that is a good point, and the mitigation by the two ways to mitigate that would be to provide some additional connectivity there for the dead ends, because you're really talking about the dead ends, which would be the east-north street discussion. I think is probably the best way to mitigate that.
Jack?
I think I hear what you're saying, Pinky, but I think probably the bigger aspect of this, and probably the main reason why we're in the situation that we are, is the embedded growth that's in the watershed and in the hillside neighborhood that wasn't there, 15, 20 years ago. Those are the people that are really creating, I think, the carbon impacts of going down that hill. And I appreciate what the staff has done to try and engineer, this particular issue. And I do feel for the neighborhood as far as their impacts. And personally, I would rather just go and do a road diet all the way up to St. Clair. As originally thought of, I think that's by far the best solution. But I understand that there's other issues associated with it, and we just have to try and mitigate it. I feel that I don't know about the rest of the council as far as the C-curb aspect of it, or what kind of impact that would be if we did it in stages. But hearing that we have a deadline on this grant, it's probably going to be an all or nothing when we start the improvements because of the design time. To me, it seems like, I guess, if I was resigned to the fact that the C-curbs needed to be in, that we would work with the neighborhood over the next maybe 3 or 4 months, say, to come up with the solution that Ted had provided with, east-north, to see whether or not there was any technical problems with it, not so much a political problem or a convenience problem or a fairness issue, but more or less, are there technical concerns about putting in an improvement on east-north? And to come back at that point to say, we can do this, here's a potential of doing it, what the funding sources are, what the timing of installation would be associated with the improvements off of Alabama. That way we would have the necessary interaction with the neighborhood. I mean, I understand that they don't want to see the C-curves, and personally, again, I don't want to see them either. I don't think it's the best approach, but given the fact that there's going to be a 4-lane road, I think minimizing the amount of left turn movements is an appropriate tool by using C-curbs. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. If we ended up creating a situation where, unless we have more discussion and we see that C-curbs is not an option from the council's perspective, but if we did have C-curbs, to me it seems like if we had the neighborhood work with the staff to come up with a design that would work, that have the amenities that are necessary to create the bike boulevard up and down, east-west for the entire section, and to make it a neighborhood feature and amenity instead of thinking of this as being punitive. I'd rather go that route.
Yeah, part of that makes sense in terms of, you know, I know part of the neighborhood's issue, yes, public put things before the final plan forward, very public, one, the things with the C is the one we're going to go, and the neighborhood that it didn't feel where was the input, because that wasn't what they were commenting on. And there might be some, maybe ways to have further discussion before, because right now, the neighborhood kind of understand that. But it was, I'm glad it was mentioned because I was going to mention it, is traffic studies do show that it's at the lights where most of the accidents happen. A lot of times, usually because the light turns green, red, and two cars decide they still want to go. What's going to change with your new plan? Because that's where the major accidents are going to. I know the public said they don't want red light cameras to curb that, even though that would probably solve a whole lot of that. But they had said they don't want that kind of stuff, and the mayor said she doesn't want that. What's going to make a difference? Those are where the major accidents are happening. So with this plan, will this reduce those accidents?
You know, it's a really good point, because you're right. That's where the accidents, the highest volume, and it's certainly, there's reasons for that. One is, you mentioned one, I mean, that there's always some enforcement issues and folks that aren't behaving or aren't following the rules of the road. But it's largely the volumes. The volumes are so high at those intersections that you're going to have a higher percentage of accidents. What this plan will do, you know, it's not going to do a whole lot for the signalized intersections. What it will do, though, is create other opportunities throughout the corridor for people to cross, so that they don't have to cross just at the intersections. They can cross at the Hawk, and I'm talking pedestrians and cyclists, so they can cross at some of these other crossing improvements. That'll take a little bit of pressure off the crossings at the signalized intersections, and some of those accidents are related to that. But largely what we're trying to do is address the ones that we can, and those are the ones where you're taking a turning movement where you don't have control, like at a signal, and eliminating it. And that's certainly the surest way to eliminate the accident, is to restrict the movement. You know, what we can do at the signalized intersections, I mean, that is generally the safest way for people to make movements, is a fully signalized intersection. The accident data does jump off at you that's where all the accidents are at, or the highest number of them. But I think you have to look at the volumes. The volumes and the turning movements are so much higher at the signalized intersections that it is understandable just to expect a higher number of accidents at those intersections.
I'd just like to add that if you consider that the collision data, the graphic that you've seen in all the materials, it's between the intersections where you have the side streets and the alleys. The rate of collisions is actually higher there than at the signalized intersections when you consider the traffic volumes going through these signalized intersections. So you really need to take everything into perspective. These side streets have a much higher rate of collisions than the signalized intersections do, just because of the sheer volumes going through there.
Michael?
Well, I think I want to start with pointing out that 2/3 of this project is universally welcome and praised. The road diet part, the crossings, enhanced crossing, you know, part-time intersection, those definite safety that are welcome. So let's not lose track of that. But I also don't want to lose track of the fact that the neighborhood has said this is a residential street, and it's very clear this is a secondary arterial. I think both parties are wrong. It's unfortunately it's a bit of both. I think we need to have a compromised design in here, because we have kind of a compromised situation. So if safety was our only goal, then I would support this. We would have a really street, but I think there are negative consequences to other aspects beyond pure safety. I think we could do 2/3 or even 3/4 of what is being proposed and get a safety improvement that the neighborhood welcomes, and the road diet over on the one portion, and the lane extensions up the hill. But I think that right now this resolution needs to be rewritten. I don't think we should recommend passing it. I think I would like to look further at I'm still in favor of removing the C curb, but I would also like to echo support for the idea of working with the neighborhood on the idea of the east-north. I think that might be a good idea one way or the other, but we haven't talked about it. I mean, I don't know how the neighbors feel about that little cut-through. We are talking about a local access road only, the sort of road that actually is pretty common in that area anyway. It might be welcome for a number of reasons. It might be helpful for the neighborhood, even if this project was never even considered. So, but the fact that that helps mitigate a lot of the access issues, I think we need to go forward with that discussion. There may be a firestorm and we say no and we back off from it, or it may be welcome. I don't know. So what I guess I'm saying is I don't think we're going to finish it in this work session because there's some things that I actually want to see investigated and or changed.
Yeah, I'm kind of think two of you are onto something with this, because I'm kind of leaning as Michael. I've got real problems with the C curbs and the neighborhood resistance to it right now, and would very much like to see if the idea that out here, if that would, how the neighborhood would react with that, with mitigation. If if would make like it better, because I do feel this is a neighborhood that for a long time hasn't felt like they've been listened to a lot of times, and it's something that we do, and so I think in the more discussion, chance for that to be heard. So I would definitely entertain a motion, to have staff work with the neighborhood a little more to see if with the idea of the other street or whatever, if to have more conversation before we finish and make our recommendation to the council of the whole. Okay?
There isn't much engineering work or hours that are invested into actually placing curb. I mean that component of whether we decide that we want to eliminate all of it or part of it or keep it all, the engineering component of it isn't going to be a big driver in the timing of the decisions of when we do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, the actual developing the construction documents of whether or not you put C curbing in or not, that's not an issue. The real work was in the analysis of the turning movements and the volumes and the throughputs, and can you support a 4-to-3 conversion, or do we need to look at another way? I mean, so that was done through the feasibility analysis. I think the bigger issue, if we modify the recommendations, is the interaction with WashDOT to come up with a plan that we could ultimately present to the DOT. The timing on this is we really would like to have this worked out by the adoption of the 6-year TIP, which the council adopts prior to July 1. And so we have May, April, May, to look at these options and bring something back to you in June. So no, to answer your question, the actual engineering of do we put C curb the whole length or the other length, that doesn't take a lot of analysis. Take a lot of analysis, I think, though, is if there's some discussion about, as Michael had suggested earlier, prioritization of the location of the C curb. How would we go about that and say that we're going to restrict it here but not there, and try to differentiate the conditions in those intersections, why we would do one and not the other. That may be a little challenging for us and take some interaction with council and the design team. So,
yeah,
Go ahead.
I could see that could be a little bit of a problem, trying to prioritize C curb is, because it could create some unintended consequences that we wouldn't know. It might channelize traffic in places where we shouldn't have additional. The other was whether or not we'd work with the neighborhood about improving that. To me, it's either you either see curbs and you need to have east north done, but if you remove the C curbs, then you don't necessarily need to have the improvements on east north. You just keep things the way that they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got a question for Pinky. This is your ward. You know your constituents. What do you think of the idea of going back out to have more discussions with the neighborhood?
Well, I think from the amount of people that care, it's pretty obvious that they're not with the complete plan. Again, I want to reiterate what Michael said. There is some wonderful work being done. I think big hanging pointers to C-curb, and from the amount of emails that I'm sure everyone else received, this is very important to the neighborhood, that they still feel like a neighborhood and that they are struggling to feel connected as it is. And I think that it is important for us to go back and to talk and maybe find a way to work together, something that we might all need to compromise a little, but at least have that conversation. So I think we should.
Is that something that would work for staff?
Yeah, I think I'd like to, sorry about that, make sure I'm fully clear on the direction. When we look at the C-curbing, is the primary concern and direction from council to reevaluate the section east of Pacific, so the dead ends going north, Queen, Racine, Undine, and Toledo and Undine.
Right.
The areas to the west of that, again, there are other streets that will be restricted. The difference being they have access from the north or from other connections already. So what I think I heard was go back and work with the neighborhoods to pursue east-north, see if a violation for the neighborhood. At the same time, we reevaluate really what would happen if we change the recommendations. I think we've had some interactions with the DOT already. They were pretty clear with us that they said what they really wanted was the final recommendation from council prior to having a lot of discussion with us. They don't want to review multiple recommendations. They want to know what's the city presenting so that they can say they support it or they don't. And I do want to make sure that I'm clear in that, it's quite possible that given what came out of the feasibility report, if we recommend something that's substantially different, that WashDOT would say that's just not going far enough. But that's a discussion we would have at the time we submitted our recommendation. So,
yeah, Jack.
The speed limit issue is not part of the WashDOT proposal.
No, it wasn't. It was not part of the recommendations that came out of the feasibility report. So,
but even if it was, if there was a reduction in speed limit, that would not necessarily be part of the report.
I think we would say that if that was the recommendation from council to adjust the speed limit, we would include that in our recommendations that were forwarded to WashDOT. I'm not sure to what degree they would look at that as to whether or not that was a safety improvement or not. I'm just guessing there'd probably be in the same campus staff on that. But
Gene, you had a question?
Yeah, Ted, is this, when you talk about deadline, is this a deadline to get a final recommendation from us to you and you to WashDOT that's predicated on the grant, or is it actual shovel, boom, ready to construct?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we really need is we need to have the funds obligated by WashDOT to allow us to the deadline of September 30th of 2015. So we have a little bit of time. You never know exactly how long that process, that interaction with the DOT and the city is going to take. But what we need is to present a recommendation to them in enough time that they could say, we approve it. They obligate the money, meaning they tell the city, yeah, you get the money, and that we can go to bid in time to have the construction completed by September 30th of 2015. So we have a little bit of time. We really were hopeful to get it wrapped up by the 2015 TIP discussion, just so that we had clarity moving forward. But we can look at the timing a little bit more, have some discussions with WashDOT, share with them where we're at, and then follow up with council after that.
Well, go ahead.
Can the tip description, though, just be improvements to Alabama and not necessarily specify exactly what they are as far as satisfaction to the tip?
Yeah, I think to meet the requirements of the tip, that would work. I think the bigger thing is just the construction obligation. That's where we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty with the WashDOT. But in terms of getting our tip approval, I think that we would be okay with just safety.
Yeah, I do think I would prefer seeing it go back for further discussions, rather because without taking a vote on the committee probably, my guess is, wouldn't recommend approval of this plan right now, and I would rather not have the can have a discussion and see if we get.
So,
do I have a motion from somebody for that kind of thing, or I can make the motion? I'll make the motion. We send this back to staff to meet with the neighbor further discussions before bringing it back to the committee.
Want a deadline?
What?
Want a deadline?
Well, I think they're going to put the deadlines on
Yeah.
because they're the ones that want to move it through. So I don't think we need to on this case because staff wants to get this forward quicker than, yeah.
we do.
So I think we're probably good on that.
Yeah, we're very sensitive about meeting the deadlines. We think this is an important project. We certainly don't want to lose the funding that we've been awarded. So staff will work with the neighborhoods, and based on whatever timeline we move forward, we'll come back to council with an update and hopefully a proposal and get some council action at that time.
Yeah. Just to make sure for the committee, all those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous, and we will recommend that tonight. Jack.
So I just, before realizing that this isn't part of the actual grant proposal itself, but I do want to come back to the speed limit issue for just a couple minutes and give my two associated with this. I look at this as being a situation where we do have different improvements that we're putting along the corridor that historically has not had them, and it has really in essence been a highway, a causeway, a freeway all the way through this area, from people just kind of bombing the hill. And I think with all of these different improvements that we are putting in, what's going to happen is that it's going to slow down some traffic. There's other traffic that's still continuing to want to be going fast. But I do feel like there's a functional speed limit versus a posted speed limit. And I think I believe that the functional speed limit is going to be lower as these pedestrian crossings and the new intersection is triggered. And to me, I would think that it would be better for us not to put the limits in there and a higher limit. I think it would put the improvements in, put a lower speed limit in, and see how that works. And if it justifies increasing the speed limit, that would be a better way of doing it. I look at this with having so many little blips all the way up and down the road as being much more congested than, say, a road like Northwest, which has things every half a mile, an intersection every half a mile, and you have the opportunity to go quite fast on Northwest, but the posted speed limit is 25. It's engineered. I'm not an engineer, but I would think that an engineer would say that Northwest is designed to go a lot faster than 5 miles an hour, given the fact that it's got, probably an average of 14 to 16 feet travel lanes. They're very wide, and and it's very straight. And Northwest, if any road in town could have an increase in speed limit, it would be Northwest. I absolutely don't want to advocate that.
You're on record now.
I'm on record of not advocating it. But I'm just saying that we have roads in town that are purposely, and I think realistically, set at lower speed limits for specific reasons. There's a school You know, there's now bike lanes, whatever it is. We have the same situation, I think, on Alabama, but even worse. And to me, I would think that I would want to advocate that we would start with a lower speed limit and then prove that we need to increase it versus the other way around.
Michael?
I think I agree with you, but with regard to that speed limit, I would support maybe 30 miles an hour, because I think the studies show that 25 does actually cause problems. So going down to a northwest speed limit, I think that already data indicate that would be troublesome. And WTA can live with 30, they can't live with 25.
If the buses are going 25 because that's what everybody else is doing, then I think 25 is the speed limit.
Well, the issue for WTA, I think, is route time. They got to get, you know, they'd have to, I don't know. There's someone here from WTA, but I think I don't want to go to 25.
Right. Yes. Mayor, did you? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Oh, pointing. Well, I think there's two ways that we can go about this. And the first way is just to make a guess on what the right limit could be. And the second is actually to do due diligence on the improvements and set a speed that we know is the appropriate speed so we don't have to change it again. You may not get phone calls about speeds all the time, but the mayor's office gets some of those. And so you can do it either way. You can do it either way. I think the second way, and it was kind of what Michael described, which was if we put all these things in, we think the speed limit is probably going to get lower. But that's not something we know. That's something we are intuitive about or we're guessing about. So I would request, and obviously it's up to the council, that we do what the staff has recommended, which is put whatever controls we're going to put on Alabama and base our speed limit on what results from those controls. I would also say that I very much support discussing east-north with the neighbors and seeing if there's an alternative solution to the problem, because that's what we do. So I appreciate the council wanting to move forward on that. But the other, there's two ways to do it. One, you'd have a little more information. One, you would be supposing that it would work. And I'm asking us to have a little more information.
Jack, you had
It's a different subject. I just wanted to bring up the speed.
Yeah.
We don't have to decide that at any point in the near future, but
Okay.
I just wanted to verify, realizing that the bicycle master plan is prioritized the improvements on Texas, Nevada, and Kentucky, and just like way up on the top as far as priority ratings. Is it your thoughts that that would be the number one thing that would come out of the bike master plan that might end up getting into this year's tip? So that this would be one of the first projects that would be a companion to the Alabama street improvements.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Chris. I'll let Chris take a stab at that in terms of the prioritization from the bike plan.
You're correct in that Texas is very high on the priority list, and as is Moore, Nevada, Kentucky connection. And there's certainly things that we could look at including. We still have to have a pretty major discussion on which kind of non-motorized projects are going to go in this year's 6-year tip. Getting ready to do that, putting it together. So those are certainly on the table in terms of possibilities. It's a matter of funding and what needs to happen. What we don't know is what exactly needs to happen on each one of these streets at this point in time to support the bicycle boulevard.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, just the bigger funding question for non-motorized, now that we'll have an adopted, hopefully soon, adopted bicycle master plan, we'll have to have some discussions with the Transportation Commission, TBD board, in terms of how we want to allocate that TBD non-motorized, because now we're going to have both bicycle and pedestrian priorities. And up till now, we've been really focusing on pedestrian because we haven't had the bicycle master plan And we've got some fairly significant pedestrian projects that we'd like to look at that non-motorized money for, too. So that's a probably bigger discussion that's yet to happen, but it is a good point. They're very high on the prioritization.
In my last visit on Texas very recently, I noticed, I mean, there are sidewalks there, but it's not at all complete. There's a number of areas where there are no sidewalks for Texas. That, I think, could be part of the bike boulevard.
Just for the record, that part of Texas is identified in the pedestrian master plan for future improvements. So,
Yeah,
again, the
that's
non-motor funding could be used in that regard as well.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for the committee? Then this committee is adjourned.